and today I want to share with you 10 podcasts that you can listen to learn Spanish. So I have found some podcasts that I think would be really helpful for you, and I think podcasts are very helpful because you can listen to them on your commute, so like while you're driving, or if you use a train or a bus, you can listen to them then. You can listen to them while at home, while you're cleaning. You can basically listen to a podcast at any time. I think that is really, really cool because it doesn't take up extra time like if you were to sit at a desk and study, but it is still helpful, it is still studying, and it is something that is very important in language learning, comprehensible input. It is also listening practice and a lot of times speaking practice because many podcasts leave gaps for you to then repeat what they have said. So in that way, you practice your speaking. Podcast number 1. This is the one that I have listened to the most, and that is why I am recommending it first. This podcast is Notes in Spanish. This podcast is done by a husband and a wife. The wife is Spanish and the husband is English and is learning Spanish or has learned Spanish. So it's a really cool dynamic to listen to. Some advantages of this podcast is that they speak slowly and they also have transcripts for every single podcast. So if you want to listen to the podcast and read the transcript at the same time, you can do that. They also have worksheets and activities that you can complete after every podcast that has to do with the topic or the subject that they spoke about in the podcast. So not only is it a podcast, but it has accompanying worksheets and transcripts, which is really, really cool. This podcast also has 3 levels. It has a beginner level, intermediate, and advanced, and a 4th one that is called Gold. And I'm going to be very honest with you, I have no idea what the Gold podcast is, but maybe one day when I get there, I will find out. So you can choose which level is appropriate for you and you can listen to that. They also have natural conversations and natural dialogue so that you can get used to hearing people speak Spanish. The second podcast is called Lightspeed Spanish. This podcast has a beginner, early intermediate, advanced intermediate, and advanced level. So you can really choose which level is appropriate for you, or you can go from the very beginning and work your way up the levels. In this podcast, they explain a lot of grammar and have a lot of conversations surrounding a specific grammar point. Podcast number 3 is called Habla espanol con unlimited Spanish. This podcast also has transcripts that you can read while listening to the podcast, which is, again, very helpful, and they speak about a wide range of topics. Podcast number 4 is called Nomados. This podcast is actually a radio show where native Spanish speakers talk on their radio show. This podcast is more suited to advanced learners as they speak really fast, and it is really intended for native speakers. But if your Spanish level is high, and you want something more challenging and advanced, I highly recommend this one. Podcast number 5 is Coffee Break Spanish, and I feel like we've all heard of them. So the concept of this is that you can learn a language during your coffee break. So every single lesson is under 30 minutes long. The difficulty progresses with the seasons. So season 1 of the podcast is beginner, and as the seasons progress, the difficulty also progresses. So starting from the beginning would really be the best way to listen to this. And they are currently up to season 9. Number 7 is called News in Slow Spanish. And this podcast is also available in other languages. And it goes without saying that this podcast is news in slow Spanish. The really nice thing about this podcast is that they have 2 options. They have an option for Spanish from Spain, and they also have an option for Latino. It's called Latino. So you can choose which type of Spanish you would want to listen to. They also have a beginner, intermediate, and advanced level podcast, and of course talk about a variety of different topics. Number 8 is the Duolingo Spanish podcast. So I know Duolingo is a little bit controversial, but they do have a really good podcast. So the podcasts are story-based, so they tell stories in a mix of English and Spanish. So if the story is getting a little bit difficult to follow, they will soon switch to English and you will be able to follow the story easier because you understand at least a part of it. They speak really slow and they also have speakers from many different countries, which means speakers with a variety of different accents and ways of speaking. So you can be exposed to a lot of different accents. And the stories are really interesting to listen to. So this podcast is genuinely entertaining. Number 9 is called Simple Stories in Spanish. And of course, this podcast tells stories. So it's also really entertaining to listen to. This podcast also provides transcripts of the stories, so you can read the stories while listening to them. And they are each around 15 minutes long, so they will not take a long time to listen to. So if you just want to listen to a quick 15-minute story, this podcast will be perfect. Then number 10 is called Discover Spanish. Each episode is under 20 minutes long, and they use practical dialogues, like for example, ordering food or making a reservation at a hotel. The only thing about this podcast is that there are not a lot of episodes and it is a bit outdated. The latest episode is in 2011, so it is more than 10 years old. But can be useful for those really necessary topics like ordering food. And those are 10 podcasts that you can listen to if you want to learn Spanish. I have listened to a few of them, not all of them, but podcasts are really, really great, like I already said, because you can listen to them anywhere and everywhere. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope it was helpful. If it was, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't for more language learning content. And I will see you next time. Goodbye. Goodbye, Lucy.